Nearly a month ago, I asked you, the humble viewer, one simple question. What do you consider to be the spookiest / most gothic classic Doctor Who serial of all time? And there was one title that recurred in your response more than any other, and that title was, of course, part of the legendary, not Philip Hinchcliffe era. Wow, I screwed that up. That's not good, is it? I'm doing a spooky season marathon of classic Doctor Who stories and none of them are actually part of the Philip Hinchcliffe era. That's really bad. I'm sorry. That wasn't actually by design, it's just kind of how it turned out. I suppose I better give a shout out to some of the Philip Hinchcliffe stories now, such as Terror of the Zygons, Brain of Morbius, Pyramids of Mars, Mask of Mandragora, The Hand of Fear, The Talons of Weng. Yikes. I mean, these are all benchmark Gothic Doctor Who stories and draw from the Gothic iconography of Doctor Who, arguably more so than any other era, but the following story I'm about to mention isn't part of that era technically. See, all of those were part of Series 13 and Series 14. This is a story from Series 15, and by that point, Doctor Who had a new producer. It wasn't Philip Hinchcliffe, it was Graham Williams. The intention with the Graham Williams era was to take Doctor Who in a bit of a new direction. When I was researching for these videos, like many others, I paid a visit to shannonsullivan.com, which is an excellent resource for pretty much everything TV Doctor Who, from classic all the way to revival. And within the website's overview of Classic Season 15, the following is written: wary of mounting criticism that Doctor Who was becoming too frightening, the BBC replaced Philip Hinchcliffe with Graham Williams. Instructed to tone down the horror and violence, Williams concluded that his only option was to place a renewed emphasis... Whoa. Tone down the horror and violence. Well, maybe a good place to start wouldn't have been a story set in a remote location, shrouded by darkness and fog, where every single character in the story dies. That's right, spoiler alert, every supporting character dies. That means that this story is technically heavier on the dead to alive ratio than the story I nominated for this category, Resurrection of the Daleks, as many of you pointed out in the comments. But Resurrection of the Daleks has a more undeserved death count, whereas a lot of the characters in this story, as we will go into, kind of are better off dead. Anyway, the point is, this story does the precise opposite to toning down the horror and violence. It embraces those tropes to maximum effect, and boy are we all eternally grateful for it. I am, of course, talking about 1977's Horror of Fang Rock. There's a bit of a Mandela effect thing going on with the title here. I always thought it was The Horror of Fang Rock, and that is what the target novelisation is called, but no, this particular story is actually just called Horror of Fang Rock, which kind of doesn't make any sense, I think. Anyway, set on a lighthouse posted in the southern coast of England, on the fictional island of Fang Rock in the hypothesised year of 1902, The Horror of Fang Rock is a bona fide Doctor Who classic, and it draws perfectly from the idea of setting a Doctor Who story within one finite, isolated location. It does this to glorious effect. Visually, this story is perfect as far as I am concerned. I love everything about the look of this story. I love the interior of the lighthouse. I love the proto-electronic equipment. I love the chroma key effects of the oceans beyond. I love the rocks. I love the fog. I love the costumes of the characters. I love the rugged look of the operators of the lighthouse and the pomposity of the stranded rich buffoons. Everything about this story visually makes the Chosen Chimp happy. I don't care if some of it looks ropey. Ropey is good. Never change this, please. But with this story being so cosmetically on point, and with it for the large part being a masterful exercise in psychological horror, I am forced to ask the question, does the end payoff truly justify everything that built towards it? Is the ending a good ending? Does it end on an appropriate, worthy climax for everything we saw leading up to that point? Let's get into it. Horror of Fang Rock was written by legendary classic Doctor Who writer Terrance Dicks, and it was originally supposed to be a vampire story, but because the BBC had already scheduled a Christmas adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, it was deemed inappropriate that Doctor Who should also have a vampire story, and so script editor Robert Holmes pitched an alternate idea for a Doctor Who adventure. For a long time, Robert Holmes had been interested in creating a story set on a lighthouse, and so production gave Terrance Dicks two very important pieces of work for him to be riffing off of. One of these pieces of work was the 1912 poem Flannan Isle, written by Wilfred Gibson, and a verse of this poem is actually spoken by the Doctor at the end of this story. The other piece of work was a 1951 story titled The Foghorn, written by legendary sci-fi writer Ray Bradbury. And these two pieces of work both drew from the isolation and fear and sinistry that is seen in Horror of Fang Rock. They laid the blueprint perfectly for what is essentially a brilliant piece of Doctor Who. However, that is only how it seems on the surface. Internally, this story was very troubled indeed. The scripts were rushed, director Paddy Russell wasn't a fan of the story, and the entire filming of Horror of Fang Rock was riddled with tales of arguments and clashes of personality and stresses and differences of creative vision of how Doctor Who should be presented. So much so that Paddy Russell never worked on a Doctor Who story after this one. Unfortunately, the truth is that a lot of these clashes and arguments came at the hands of Tom Baker, whose creative control and general temperament had become ever more exacerbated since originally taking on the role 3 seasons earlier. Unfortunately also, Horror of Fang Rock was by no means the last occasion where Tom Baker's aggressive side would manifest on set. There's footage and outtakes of him yelling and swearing at directors long after this serial was produced, and it is a bit of a sad undercurrent to Tom Baker Adventures that he was a bit of a temperamental git to work with in ways that might even have made William Hartnell blush. It's a complex and nuanced conversation because he is still part of the Doctor Who family and he still creates stories for Big Finish, and by all accounts and through all intents and purposes he seems a little more humbled and a little more contrite than he was back in those days. There's also a lot of accounts of him apologising to people for his behaviour, so if you want to go down the wormhole of talking about the dark side of Tom Baker, then it's important to kind of weigh out all these things together to get the bigger picture. I'm just saying it would be completely wishy-washy of me to exclude the fact that during serials like The Horror of Fang Rock he was a pain in the arse and sometimes a bit of a nasty person. One of the most triumphant stories that comes out of these accounts is that of Louise Jameson's. When we get more into this story, I'm going to talk about how much I love Leela as a character, but reading up on this increased my already large respect for Louise Jameson, the actress. Not only did she stand up for the credibility of her character when she read the original script and found out that Leela was screaming and getting scared, which is completely uncharacteristic of Leela, and she won that battle and those parts of the script were removed, but she actually stood up to Tom Baker during one scene as well. In particular, I enjoyed discovering this paragraph in a 2002 write-up on Horror of Fang Rock in Doctor Who magazine. Baker's concerns over the character of Leela were also manifesting themselves as his attitude towards cast and crew became more temperamental. The actor did not really want a companion at all, and took out his unease on Jameson. Russell recalled, that's Paddy Russell, how Baker would not speak to the actress or would make barbed comments. As a result, Jameson started to assert herself in rehearsals in a manner that she had not done before. The actress stood up to Baker in a confrontation over one scene in particular. This broke the ice, and Baker later apologised to Jameson for his behaviour, saying that he was arguing about the script so much only because he cared about the programme so greatly. After this, the pair's working relationship improved. A feel-good resolution in an otherwise troubled production. Anyway, let's get into the story. Right, here's a comet. or something. It's crash landing in the water. It looks brilliant. It's purple. The water flashes purple. This is classic Doctor Who at its finest right here. So this lighthouse is occupied by Reuben, Vince and Ben. Reuben is the superstitious old boy who has seen everything and done everything in the old craggy setting of Lighthouse by the Coast Nuss. And he's actually quite a nice dude. He's strong-willed and tough and very, very set in his ways, but he's a pleasant guy to be around, and so the other two as well. Ben and Reuben are having some often light-hearted debates as to whether oil-lit lights are better than electrical lamps, as was the revolution of technology at the time. Anyway, they spy this thing crash landing in the water, and the lighthouse goes on the blink. Reuben's kind of secretly chuckling over this because it proves his theory that electricity is unreliable. Later on it would go back on because, as it turns out, the creature has this ability to manipulate electricity in all kinds of dangerous and sporadic ways. Not that anybody knows that at the time. Cue the Doctor and Leela is still wearing her outfit from the talons of Weng Chang. As it turns out, this is not the intended destination of Brighton or Worthing. The Doctor got lost in the fog. Before deciding to hop back in the TARDIS, which is boring, the Doctor looks up and sees that the lighthouse has no light. How strange. Well, that's piqued his curiosity, so we're in it for the long haul. And this atmospheric setting is what you get consistently from beginning to end. It remains constantly dark, constantly foggy, this ominous green light showing up now and again, and yeah, I even love the generator room. Look at it, it's just great. So poor Ben is the first person to get attacked by the blob. And for the time being, before the blob truly reveals who and what it is, you get these occasional perspectives from the creature's own eyes. A green screen surrounded by this one lens in the middle where it has black and white vision and sneaks up on characters, so you don't really know what's attacking to begin with. Again, this works perfectly cosmetically with everything else you see in this story. Great stuff. So the first lighthouse occupant that the Doctor and Leela meet is Vince. He is young, he is green, he is slightly anxious, but again, he's a nice fella like the other two. There's no preamble here whatsoever. Like, the Doctor and Leela come up the stairs to the lighthouse and Vince literally just greets them and says, "Come on in," and that's the end of that. After the breaking of the ice between the Doctor, Leela and crew, the Doctor finds Ben's body in the generator room. Death by electricity, it seems. This kind of puts the other two occupants of the lighthouse on high alert, and Reuben initially thinks that the Doctor and Leela might be foreign spies of some sort, but the real clash between him and the Doctor concerns this superstitious belief that there is some kind of beast of Fang rock.
Beast of Fang rock.
Aye.
Apparently, 80 years ago, 2 people mysteriously died. Hold that thought, or not. But I honestly can't stress how hospitable enough Vince is. He offers Leela a warm drink and then sit. And this is the point where I'm just going to talk about how much I love Leela as a character and a companion. You get that perfect mix of profound innocence and fierce bravery and devotion, which is not so hugely tipped on either side as it is with any other companion. She is just this relentless warrior that carries weapons. She's never afraid, she never screams, she is always bold, and her ability to become friends with people and to learn and to adapt and to generally be pleasant, but
subscribe to The Chosen Chimp on Patreon for more Doctor Who stuff. I'm 43 years old. This is ridiculous. It's just not even really a faithful adaptation of the Max Headroom incident. Like, I've got a sort of suit coat. Take that off. But when it actually happened, there was a spinny metal thing in the background. It wasn't in a shed. They had a Coke can and not a plant pot. And well, obviously I'm not going to do this fly swatting thing because it's not that kind of channel. So yeah, I think I embarrassed myself and my audience. But hey ho, I'm doing the Max Headroom thing. Obviously I am. In 1987 in a local Chicago TV network, 2 separate stations were hacked. The first one was during a news bulletin about the Chicago Bears, and the hack lasted 28 seconds and then promptly disappeared as the people running the network got control. But later on, in a different Chicago network, this one transmitting an episode of Doctor Who and the horror of Fang Rock. It happened again. This time around, it was when Ben was saying, "Let me get you a warm drink, man." The signal cut away to the tawdry gesticulations of a strange figure wearing sunglasses and a Max Headroom mask. And the reason why this has captured the imaginations of people on the internet for decades to come is that the true assailants were never found. But however, there are theories. There is a very prevalent theory that this was orchestrated by 2 people who were into the local hacking scene at the time. It is kind of verified by a Reddit user back in 2000 and something who talked about meeting people briefly, and one of them was severely autistic, and his sense of humour and his language and his speech was very similar to the person on this video. This person who posted on Reddit later went to the party of this guy and his brother and a few of their other friends, and not only did they find a room full of strange electrical equipment, but they also got the tip off that something big was going to happen and that they should watch the local Chicago news networks on that night. However, that same Reddit user a few years later got in touch with somebody else who worked inside the TV networks, and this person explained that to have the knowledge and the equipment to be able to pull off this hacking meant that the person had to be somebody working within the TV industry, not these strange outsiders. Perhaps somebody with a grudge, perhaps somebody who wanted revenge, a disgruntled employee of some kind. Interesting. Now, I kind of think that if I was going to write this as a sort of thriller novel and I was going to disregard crucial pieces of the truth, like novels of that ilk sometimes do, then I would have a twist where a disgruntled employee was somehow affiliating himself with these outside anarchists who come together to shock the world with this display of a man flicking a Coke can and getting swatted on the backside by a woman with a fly swatter. Now, here's the thing. What I find interesting about this is when I researched it recently, there was a vox pop of a small boy who saw the broadcast at the time, who was being interviewed, and he said he thought it was very funny. That small boy was not I, because I was 5 years old, I was living in North Wales, and when BBC News reported the Max Headroom incident, it scared the absolute bejesus out of me, because I was sat cross-legged in front of the television screen when they showed the whole video. This man in the mask with the warped voice like a retro Cyberman, the spinny background, him lunging into the camera doing things with his fingers and expelling all this garbled language that you couldn't even understand. I was completely freaked. Probably more so than a few years later when I saw the Auton doll come to life on Resistance is Useless. I think that was 1992. This was 1987. I would only have been 5 years old. So please understand that this is not a crucial part of Doctor Who and the horror of the Fang Rock. This is essentially not the horror of Fang Rock trivia. It is only circumstantial that the Max Headroom incident happened during an episode of Doctor Who. The two things in and of themselves are completely disconnected. So if you find the whole Max Headroom incident thing completely tacky and not even worthy of a Doctor Who internet video, I understand and respect that. But I request your indulgence just for a moment, because this is something that is deeply personal to me. I regard this as a kind of formative moment of the things that would scare the absolute piss out of me on TV and audio and any kind of media growing up thereafter. I find it really interesting that this small child way over there wasn't freaked out, but I was. What was it about me? What was it about me that was so affected by this? Now, what I find interesting most of all, I think, is the fact that one of the people who is supposedly, I say supposedly, responsible for this, is that he himself was neurodivergent, more specifically autistic. Neurodivergency covers an extremely broad set of things. I understand that very, very much. I am looking into the possibility in my later years of being 43 that I might possibly be neurodivergent myself. And the more testimonies I hear from people with autism, with ADHD, with ADD, with PDA, with Asperger's, and so many others, the more I think that this could very well be a thing that, when I consider, explains a lot about how my brain has worked in the past. And the thing I find interesting about the Max Headroom incident is, if this was indeed somebody else who was neurodivergent, albeit on under a completely different category of neurodivergency, what is that connection between what that person wanted to do and their motivation for doing this, and me not living in Chicago, but being a 5-year-old boy in a dark winter in North Wales, sat cross-legged in front of a telly? What was going on between those two minds? Whatever the intent that person had, if it was even close to intending to alarm and startle and frighten, I think this worked on me possibly more than anybody else. And I don't feel sorry for myself because of that. I just find it really bloody interesting. And I would love the Max Headroom incident to be solved one day, because I feel like I have a very personal connection with it. And I don't think this is going to be the last time.
And a woolly jumper, Leela goes out hunting in the dark on the dangerous rocks by herself. And she finds a load of dead fish bobbing at the surface of the water, and the blob is tracking her the entire time. Meanwhile, Ben's body has done a runner. So this is indeed a mysterious and turbulent situation, but given the outgoing nature of Doctor and Companion, and given the general enthusiasm of the two surviving occupants of the lighthouse, I'm sure we've got the perfect mix of temperaments to see this story through in a linear fashion. Or at least that's what would happen if these bloody plebs didn't turn up. As if the fish didn't have enough problems. These new characters introduced in episode 2 are dead annoying. Perfect fodder. But before they all die, we've got to just put up with them. They're that squealy mix of selfish and obnoxious. Straight away, Henry Palmerdale is demanding brandy, and Vince is like, no, you're having soup instead. Henry is a financier who was in a rush to get to Southampton so he could get a train to London to meet his brokers to make good on the cash-ins that he dodgily received at a casino or something like that. Aiding him in this foolhardy quest was Jimmy Skinsale. He's also a former colonel and member of parliament and General Dick Van Dyke impressionist, I think. I might have got him mixed up with some other classic actor. Jimmy's missus and also Henry's secretary, Adelaide Lesage, is everything that Leela isn't. I can't believe we are stuck with these three. There's one other crew member, a coxswain by the name of Hawker, who is actually one of the likeable people, but he kind of fades into the background for the majority, and for the intermittent, when we're not dealing with the mystery of this alien blob, we have to put up with the temperaments and argumentative, insecure bullshit of these characters. But these characters are only annoying by design. What you have here is the perfect recipe for psychological horror and inner turmoil. Later on in this episode, Henry tries to goad Hawker into sending a Morse code message to his brokers, and Hawker immediately aggressively shouts back at him, saying it was his impromptu, impulsive, stressy, rushed, entirely selfish nature that got him stranded and half of the crew dead already. You then get a scuffle and a fight, at which point the Doctor comes in and says this.
I've got news for you. This lighthouse is under attack, and by morning we might all be dead.
What a great way to break up an argument. It's at this point you kind of get the juxtapose between Reuben's old fables of the Beast of Fang Rock and the Doctor's scientific observations of this green blob being a creature of high electrical powers. It can charge things that it touches, it can electrocute people to death at touch, but little do they realise that it has other powers as well, namely chameleon powers. Unfortunately, the next person to get bumped off in this story is Reuben. I like the fact that Reuben's final act before he does the sign of the cross was to scoff at Ben's electrical generator, and it is kind of fitting as electricity kills him. He was sort of right. Kind of. But while the Doctor is laying down the reality of the situation to the stranded occupants of the lighthouse, Leela is making some characteristic progressions of her own. She deduces that this is an enemy that is more cunning and bold, an enemy that sneaks up and attacks people when nobody is looking. Episode 3 is where the body count truly starts to rise, and there is also an interesting ruffle in what we knew about this creature. Reuben is dead, but in his place we've got this evil Reuben. Look at him there. This story should have been called Doctor Who and the Gnome of Terror. On realising how truly dangerous this creature is, the Doctor barricades the door so it can't get in, but he doesn't realise that he's actually trapped the creature inside because it has now disguised itself as Reuben. The next victim on the list is fortunately Henry, who is electrocuted and then he falls off a balcony. Ha ha! Before Henry dies, hilariously, he tries to bribe Vince £50 to send the Morse code message to his London brokers. Vince does the right thing later on in the story and burns that £50. Keep in mind, folks, that this was set in 1902 and £50 was significantly a lot more money. Back then, with £50 you could buy 5 villas. I might have got that wrong. It's at this point that I notice that the railing to that balcony is dangerously low. No wonder Henry fell off the side. It's still funny though. So by this time the Doctor is making further notions to convince Jimmy and Adelaide the severity of the situation, but neither of them are really helping. Not only is Adelaide getting increasingly anxious, but Jimmy is scoffing at him, referring to his story as being as fanciful as the works of H.G. Wells, at which point the Doctor gives a shout out to H.G. Wells and says that even though he might have got a few facts wrong, his predictions were very much on point, or words to that effect. And if you want to learn about the 2 female characters of this story in a nutshell, look no further than this handful of seconds.
He says he thinks Lord Palmerdale's fallen from the lamp gallery.
They later make motions to calm Adelaide's frayed nerves by dropping Henry's wet, dead body in front of her. So Jimmy, for fear of having his own reputation besmirched, broke the telegraph. You stupid. And this is where the body count really amasses. Poor Hawker, he's dead, and quite frankly, Vince did really well to last as long as he did. We're now into handful of survivors mode, with the Doctor realising the fateful mistake of actually trapping the monster inside with them. Reuben is walking around chasing everybody, and there's one scene where the Doctor hides by hanging outside of the lighthouse. That's crazy. Look at him there. And it's really important that the surviving characters just hold their nerve and... Yeah, anyway, she gets killed in quite a brutal fashion. Electric shock to the face, that can't be good. It's at this point that Leela throws a knife at evil Reuben, aka the Blob, aka the Rutan. We'll get to that in a second, but it is to no avail. And so we get to the final act of this story. The payoff, the all-important climax. And with it comes an explanation that turns everything on its head in the most bat-plop crazy fashion imaginable. So, the Beast of Fang Rock, as we've kind of known it up until this point, is actually a Rutan. Rutons are the sworn enemies of the Sontarans, and this name has actually been referenced in the previous Sontaran stories, the Time Warrior and the Sontaran Experiment. Rutons are a galactic race of soldiers, warriors type thing who once ruled Mutter's Spiral, but now they are on the retreat and they are losing the war against the Sontarans, and so this particular Ruton specimen went out on a ship to find a habitable planet upon which they could rebuild their army and proceed with a counter-strike against the Sontarans. That planet in question was Earth. The human beings will be destroyed by the resulting counter offense from the Sontarans, but that is of no significance. It will be a massive victory for the Ruton army. This particular Ruton from Ruta 3 crashed on Earth and set up a homing signal by the generator so that the Ruton mothership can hone in and basically begin the conquest of Earth. Wow, where the Hillary Dickens did this come from? It was the ultimate kind of who goes there creature, and now it's sitting on a flight of stairs having a conversation with the Doctor, and its speech, its dialogue, the way it talks, it kind of just seems a little bit anxious and pathetic.
All your interference is useless. The beam was transmitting long enough for the mothership to trace the signal.
Can't be certain of that.
And the Doctor is scoffing back at it, and the entire mythology just suddenly takes on a new life that I think is a bit disproportionate. It was psychological horror, it was small and self-contained, and now we're getting this story of clashing armies in outer space. Great for science fiction, great for the imagination, but does it work? I'm not sure it does. And where does this leave Ruben's fables of the Beast of Fang Rock 80 years ago, and we know that this thing only crashed at the beginning of this episode? Was there another previous Ruton scout ship, and if it was, why didn't it message the mothership to begin with anyway? Surely Earth would have been conquered by now if that was the case. So does that completely nullify Ruben's testimony? Was the Doctor right that this was just baseless superstition? That's not how stories like this work. Even the superstitions and the fables somehow feed into the current plight that the characters are in. Those are the rules. That's just a wasted plot point now, because this is an alien waging an intergalactic battle.
Aye.
I don't have any problem with this thing cosmetically. I mean, it is a bit kind of silly, sort of bobbing up the steps, but it looks kind of cool. There's quite a lot of production backstory to this in the Doctor Who magazine I read about how it was lit by a halogen lamp. It's a good creature in essence, but they give it this character, and I don't think the character works. I don't think the backstory works, and it kind of lets the rest of the tale down, I think. The Doctor tries to defeat it by throwing a stick of lit dynamite down the stairs, which only stuns it. So next time around he gets this tube that can act as a mortar, and he loads it with gunpowder and coins. I mean, it does the thing. It kills the creature well enough, and Leela stands at the top of the stairs yelling at it as it shrivels and dies. During this battle, Jimmy redeems himself because he was never as much of a rifle as Henry was, and his death is one of those kind of cool tentacle reverse deaths. I like it. Good way to go. Honourable, like the soldier that he was. And then the Doctor uses a diamond to convert the lighthouse into a laser weapon to destroy the mothership. What? There it is there, represented by that glowing orb, and you see it blowing up by the lighthouse, which is a pretty cool visual. You've even got the shrapnel landing on their heads at the end. So the story ends and everybody's dead, but it's fine because Leela's eyes change colour and the Doctor tells her a nice poem. So it kind of ends on a happy note, at least for Leela and the Doctor, who leave the TARDIS and just all that wreckage and death and decaying corpses stay there indefinitely, and there you go, and the remains of a destroyed Ruton mothership. I don't know where this ending came from. Remember how I said that those scripts were rushed? I don't think that showed at any point until this finale. Everything leading up until this seems like a very neatly composed, self-contained adventure. Lots of horror, lots of turmoil, lots of treachery, deceit, all the trimmings. It works. And then you get this right at the end. I mean, I suppose there is something to be said for it, right? You've got the perspective of the humans trying to make the best of figuring out a celestial force that is beyond their understanding. There is something very Lovecraftian about that, I suppose, and the fact you get a little insight into what this creature really is and how it is so magnificently beyond human comprehension is kind of cool. But I think that only works if you tell the story through other perspectives a bit more consistently. The fact that this is dropped at the very final act, it just doesn't work, and it's almost an anti-climax to what audiences were possibly hoping for at that point. There is a haunting quality to the fact that Doctor and Leela leave all this death and decomposition behind, but because they're so happy exiting in the TARDIS, it kind of doesn't feel that way, and I have to conclude that the end result, the ending, the finale, the climax of Horror of Fang Rock doesn't really work personally. And if you disagree, cool. I acknowledge that this is a story that is close to the hearts of many, and I didn't see Horror of Fang Rock until a lot later on in life, whereas there are other Doctor Who stories that, you know, I don't even care about the faults because it is that close to my childhood and that close to my formative years as a Doctor Who fan. So despite the fact that I stick by my criticisms, at the same time, it's not really a hill I'm willing to die on. There is so much more good stuff to Horror of Fang Rock than there's bad stuff. The total package, at the end of the day, the end product is a marvellous bit of classic Doctor Who, and given all the turmoil production went through to get to this point, I think this story is an absolute miracle. It is a beast unto its own. It is distinct, it is memorable. There are so many reasons why this has stood the test of time and lives in the hearts of many. I understand why people instantly flocked to tell me that this was kind of the ultimate spooky gothic Doctor Who experience. Horror of Fang Rock is great. Warts and all, it's great. I love it. The Chosen Chimp approves. And that is where I end my season of spooky Doctor Who stories that are also gothic. But please, don't stop there. Get in the comments and tell me what you thought about Horror of Fang Rock. Tell me the things that you loved about it, the things you didn't like about it, and some of the facts that I may have missed. Thank you so much for watching this video. Your viewership means a great deal. If you want to check me out on social media, then please visit my Blue Sky page at thechosenchimp.bsky.social. You can head over also on Patreon at patreon.com/chosenchimp, where you can become a distinguished follower for just £1 a month and request your Doctor Who topic for coverage. Your name will be mentioned in the video and your contribution will go towards making this channel a smarter, stronger, better smelling place with no weird hacks or glitches. I don't know why I just said that. Anyway, I hope you are all safe and well, and please, for the love of Pete and his world, have a good one.